So the skin, what we're going to do here is give you an explanation of sort of a process that we've used on an infographic from start to finish. We're going to take some time on this one, and hopefully you'll have questions later for us about this or other examples we show you. So the process that we use is we start with a brief, and that really is, it can literally be a brief from a client. It can be a phone call from a client. It can be a one-sentence email. Sometimes we get floods of data. Sometimes we get no data at all, and we have to do research ourselves. It just really depends on the client. Sometimes it's talking about something that maybe doesn't have a lot of data behind it, so we have to figure out what we can draw as a comparison that will help to tell a story. So sometimes the story is not data-driven, and we need to figure out how to really tell that story. Once we have that brief, the very first thing we do is we start to go through, and Colin will expand on this in a minute, but we start to go through and pick out the most important points. And we basically construct a story. Then we develop that story and make sure we know exactly what we're trying to say. If there's research that has to be done, we conduct that research. Then we move into sketching. And when we sketch, we start to also create a visual language. We start to think about the brand or the client or the story and what visual language is best for that audience or for that brand. And then we go through a very iterative process. We're big fans of design iteration, so we draw very many times. We start to sketch in tools like Illustrator very quickly, and we get information back and forth to a client pretty quickly. We have a very fluid relationship with our client because, again, we want to make sure, especially if it's something that we don't have deep understanding of, that we're on the right track.
So here's an example of a brief that we would get. This brief actually has a decent amount of information. This is an example, I think it was from FedEx, and it was about B corporations. So for me, B corporations was something new, and I had to do some initial research just to understand it. Then we look through the data. We try to figure out really what that story is that we're trying to tell. This is whenever you parse information that's going to be with the main storyline, and then have your supporting data that's not necessarily part of the main story, but still data that is important to tell that story.
Yeah, so in this case, this was for Good Magazine, and Good does a really great job of providing us with really pretty concise briefs. This is probably an example of one of our best ones where there's already some information organization happening on the page. If you can get to this point from the client side, if you're working with an outside design firm, again, not knowing who's on this call, but if you're coming from the outside and you're looking at commissioning an infographic or an illustration like this, if you can get to a point like this where you have some data, some story, and you've created some sort of segregation between the sections, this is really sort of the best that you can kind of hope for in a brief, I think. Or yeah, one of the better examples.
Yeah.
What we do with this is we make sure that we understand what the important parts are. And what you see here in this brief that the client's done very effectively is break it up into sections for us. There are a few different stories that are being told here, but they're all part of this bigger question, which is, are B corporations the future of business in America? When you can start with that question or that title, it helps us understand that our story is actually saying, what is a B corporation? How do you become one? And then what's the effect? And really, we go through that step by step, and we look at what data we have to sort of help tell that story.